When I say a brand name like OnlyFans, of course your mind is going to jump pretty much automatically to sex work and not safe for work content. And that is something that OnlyFans has really built the whole company around. But we're going to get into all of this today. But recently they announced significant changes where it looks like they're really going to crack down on the not safe for work content they have on their platform. Although vague at the moment, it's pretty clear the direction this stuff is going. Now, what I want to talk about today is how these social media sites and these platforms like Tumblr, like Patreon, like OnlyFans often are very happy to have sex workers and nude content on their platforms while they're rising and while they're getting more popular, only to then abandon these people when they want to appeal to more, I guess, traditional businesses, banks and things like that, to keep endorsing or using their platform or allowing users of the platform to use their facilities. We are also going to talk about the covert far-right war on this content that has been going on, which actually explains to a degree why OnlyFans have actually taken this action. Because it's not as cut and dry as it seems, and while these brands do use sex workers and then abandon them, this covert religious war on pornography in general is in part responsible for these changes too. I'm going to plug my social media and Patreon for about a minute, so skip that stuff if you're not interested. Get any further, a lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible pledging little amounts like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Kavernacle at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. Because some weird person said they don't like watching my content if I'm not in my traditional set, I'm just staying at my girlfriend's, so I had to make it in her bedroom. Back to the traditional set tomorrow and for the foreseeable future, essentially, so don't worry about that stuff. I live stream 2 times a week and I archive all that stuff in the Kavernacle Extra, so go check that out if you care about any of that. So if you're behind on the news, it broke last week that OnlyFans to ban pornographic videos after pressure from business partners. Despite the striking change beginning in October, nude photos and videos will still be allowed on the platform, best known for its sexually explicit content. In a striking change for a company best known for this content, OnlyFans will begin banning users from posting content containing sexually explicit conduct this October due to requests from banking partners and payment providers, the company said Thursday. Nude photos and videos will still be allowed on the platform, providing they follow OnlyFans' rules, but it's not immediately clear how the company will determine what kind of sexually explicit content will fall under the ban. Earlier this year, OnlyFans quietly blocked users from posting public sex content to its platform. The changes come as OnlyFans, which has 2 million creators and more than 130 million users, has been seeking funding from outside investors at a $1 billion valuation. According to Axios, OnlyFans has struggled to find VC funding due in part to concerns about adult content on the platform and the potential difficulty in finding brand partners due to the company's reputation. So of course the backlash was pretty swift when you read articles like that, and I do not blame people for taking out their frustrations on OnlyFans because it's clear part of the decision is they want to go more public, get more funding, and they feel that they have to really, I guess, shed this image of being a platform for primarily sex workers. But honestly, I don't know who's going to use OnlyFans when they get rid of this, but they tweeted, in response to a lot of the backlash, "Dear sex workers, the OnlyFans community would not be what it is today without you. The policy change was necessary to secure banking and payment services to support you. We are working around the clock to come up with solutions. So people were responding to this. So I just want to read some of the reactions. So Delilah DeLune saying, OnlyFans has a choice to meet MasterCard's requirements, but they're choosing to push us out. Let's also remember that OnlyFans has been arbitrarily banning sex workers and confiscating our earnings for years. If we owned our own platform, we would make better decisions for ourselves. At Real Mirror saying, so instead of dropping Visa and MasterCard, you chose to drop us, the people who built your platform. You never promoted us, only random fitness instructors and celebrities. We brought the traffic and you kicked us to the curb instead of standing up for us against payment services. Brother Q saying, literally the only time you ever address sex workers is this tweet, showing that if you type in OnlyFans and sex work into the Twitter search bar, they have never mentioned sex work before. Miss Mary Moody also saying, how dare you? You abandoned sex workers to save your own asses when you had the opportunity to fight financial discrimination of all sex workers by MasterCard and banks. These are hollow words until you publicly and honestly fight that. So just getting a bit more into the justification for this stuff, here is the OnlyFans founder who spoke to the Financial Times. So OnlyFans founder Tim Stokely has blamed unfair treatment by banks for forcing him to ban pornography on the platform, a decision that has caused an outcry from the site's users and sowed doubt over its future. The change in policy, we had no choice. The short answer is banks. Stokely, who is also the company's chief executive, told the Financial Times. Stokely, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm going with Stokely, said the change came in response to an increased level of obstacles from banks which would cite reputational risk and refuse our business. We pay over 1 million creators, over 3 million every month, and making sure these funds get to creators involves using the banking sector. He said, singling out the Bank of New York, Mellon, as having flagged and rejected every wire connected to our company, making it difficult to pay our creators. Stokely also said UK-based Metro Bank had in 2019 closed OnlyFans' corporate account with short notice and highlighted how many sex workers, including OnlyFans creators, were struggling to access basic financial services. JP Morgan Chase is particularly aggressive in closing accounts of sex workers or any business that supports sex workers. Stokely claimed OnlyFans had been unfairly targeted by media reports into incidents of illegal content that failed to mention how porn-free social media platforms grapple with similar issues. Banks read the same media as anyone else. Some financial groups, such as MasterCard, have responded to the growing wariness of the porn industry with more stringent rules for specialty merchants due to take effect on October 1st, the same date as OnlyFans policy changes comes into effect. This prompted speculation that MasterCard was driving the platform's new policy, something that Stokely disputed. He said, we didn't make this policy change to make it easier to find investors. The decision was made to safeguard the funds and subscriptions from increasingly unfair actions by banks and media companies. We obviously do not want to lose our most loyal creators. I am one of the most skeptical people when it comes to capitalists and corporations, but he is not lying there. Now, I definitely believe that OnlyFans has completely built its brand basically on sex workers and is abandoning them. But I do want to discuss how there actually is a lot of pressure on these banks by conservative and religious organizations to stop being involved at all with sex work. But just to give the other side of the argument, like a lot of people are saying, which seems pretty clear as well, is that Tumblr also did what OnlyFans have done, and this is back in 2018, and The Verge reporting how Tumblr went from being the most porn-friendly social media site to banning porn. Tumblr was incredibly friendly to adult content, Twitter was too text-heavy to properly showcase erotic art, and Facebook was too prudish. Tumblr offered a happy medium. It allowed users to indulge in porn without ruining their reputations and was image-friendly enough to allow users to scroll through pictures with ease. Many porn professionals looked askance at Tumblr's adult content, pointing out that much of what was shared on the site was stolen from pay sites and redistributed, but the Tumblr community adored and embraced a cluster of sites that offered curated selections of hardcore content, pairing photos and GIFs with quick comments and captions, or oftentimes just allowing the content to stand on its own, creating an endless scroll of the hottest smut the Tumblr blogger could find. By January 2010, the Tumblr smut community was established enough to get official endorsement. That month, the site staff unveiled an officially sanctioned directory of erotic Tumblrs, which was listed alongside similar directories of Tumblrs devoted to art, fashion, photography, and food. So this wasn't just something that went on Tumblr, it was recognised by Tumblr itself and even promoted to an extent. For a time, this balance worked out well. In 2013, TechCrunch reported that a full 11.4% of the top 200,000 Tumblrs were adult-oriented, and adult sites were sending Tumblr a sizable amount of traffic. Porn helped Tumblr's empire, and Tumblr gave porn fans a safe playground to explore their interests, one that enabled them to check out hot, smart, and hardcore porn without having to venture to the darker, more unpleasant corners of the internet. But then Tumblr decided to cash out, and the beautiful ecosystem began to collapse. In spring 2013, Tumblr was acquired by Yahoo, and just a few months later, there were signs that the new ownership wanted to make some changes. By July of that year, Tumblr had set up a complicated filtering system where blogs featuring not safe for work content were now marked as so, with adult blogs disappearing from search and tag pages entirely. Once Tumblr became the property of Verizon, the relationship between Tumblr and its smut peddlers began to fray even further. Last year, so in 2017, the platform debuted a safe mode that filters out all sensitive content. In February of 2018, safe mode became the site's default. Users interested in exploring the naughtier side of Tumblr now needed to explicitly opt in, creating an uncomfortable barrier that further segregated Tumblr's not safe for work accounts from the rest of the site. So during 2018, the romance between Tumblr and adult content officially ended. Smutty Tumblr users began receiving notifications that their content had been flagged for removal. The site's terms of service was updated to indicate that come December 17th, adult content would be explicitly forbidden on the site's servers. So there is the biggest example of a social media platform using sex work to attract lots of users. It said, in 2010 it was like 11%, probably more by the time they brought in the rules, and then abandoned them. Of course, unlike OnlyFans, Tumblr wasn't just known for this stuff. It did have a reputation for platforming this stuff, but Tumblr is like a broader social media, and then it's probably not as surprising in this case that they did this, but it still shows you a company using sex workers to gain a lot of traffic and then cracking down on them when they're bought by someone else or they want to sanitize it to appeal to more investors. But sex workers were also key in the growth of Snapchat with the premium accounts. A Daily Beast article also saying sex workers were also integral in Patreon's early growth. While hardcore content has always been forbidden, Patreon's terms of service stated, "We allow nudity and suggestive imagery, citing its value as art." Many sex workers rose to the challenge, creating carefully crafted, beautiful nudes and marking them as not safe for work. Many creators also sold more explicit content to the same fans. A breakthrough moment for adult content creators came when Patreon announced that not safe for work pages would have equal access to payment processing via PayPal. Within a year, though, Patreon made a full 180-degree shift in policy. Patreon dropped the language protecting nudity. Adult content creators, desperate to maintain their livelihoods, wrote a public letter arguing that it was unfair to remove them. In the end, the pleas didn't seem to matter and sex workers were driven from the site en masse. So I just wanted to outline Patreon, Snapchat, and specifically Tumblr to show that this type of thing has been done before on platforms that often feature sex workers, often have a reputation for platforming this content, but have then abandoned these people and suddenly changed their terms of service. And that is a problem with a few companies really having the most influence in terms of crowdfunding. I'm on Patreon, I have a Patreon. Imagine one day they change the terms of service that you couldn't talk about controversial political issues, for example. And we all know why they might try and downplay it and say, oh, it's fine, you can continue talking about that. What if you start criticizing someone they don't like or someone they have ties to with their investors, whether that may be people from Saudi Arabia or people from Israel, for example, any of those people. And then they might ban your account for, hate speech or anything like that. And I said in my video about social media stuff, while I broadly agree there do have to be a set of rules on social media platforms or crowdfunding platforms, at the end of the day, the massive problem is that a few big companies basically control this market. Now, not safe for work content, including video pornography and everything like that, one of the most popular things on the internet. So it's really not surprising companies would use this stuff to gain traction and gain some sort of notoriety maybe, or just general popularity. But now I want to shift this to what the founder of OnlyFans was saying, because you guys might be thinking about what I've said so far. That's all true for Tumblr, Patreon, and Snapchat, but OnlyFans is so much weirder because this isn't just, has a reputation for featuring this stuff. OnlyFans is pretty much synonymous with sex work. And what the guy said about the banks is true to an extent. And I didn't know about any of this going on, but there are shady organizations full of basically Christian fundamentalists who are behind these massive pushes to essentially criminalize sex work or deplatform sex work to get it out of the public eye. And they are basically pressure groups on things like banks to really get them out of this sex work ecosystem. So the Daily Beast did a good article and XBiz expanded on it and is far more detailed. But they did an article called The Real Reason Why OnlyFans is Banning Porn. It talks about MasterCard and it talks about the new controls it brought in, and these will take effect on October 15th. And it says that the banks that connect merchants to our network to certify that the seller of adult content has effective controls in place to monitor, block, and take down all illegal content. These controls include documented age and identity verification for all people depicted and those uploading the content review process prior to publication, complaint resolution process that addresses illegal or non-consensual content within 7 business days, appeals process allowing for any person depicted to request their content to be removed. And MasterCard did not act alone. It was pressured into the decision by groups like Exodus Cry and the National Center for Sexual Exploitation, and that is the NCOSE. And I want to talk about these specifically. And they've waged years-long campaigns on sites like OnlyFans and Pornhub with the ultimate aim of abolishing the sex work industry entirely. Following the OnlyFans announcement, the NCOSE did a victory lap, releasing a statement saying the announcement made by OnlyFans that it will prohibit creators from posting material of sexually explicit conduct on its websites comes after much advocacy from the group, survivors and allies. Before I go any further, I thought it'd be helpful to just outline my views on sex work. A lot of leftists I've actually spoke to are really anti-sex work based on like moral grounds, which I find very weird. So here's my take on it, right? Sex work is legitimate work like any other job basically. You're selling your body for capitalism, right? So we're all in this brutal, awful system. We all use our bodies in some way to make profit for another person. If you're in a maybe more privileged position, you can maybe have a thriving business you started yourself, or maybe you're a content creator. And that's what I see OnlyFans is, that it's like a YouTuber essentially, like me, for example. So I have no prejudice against that. You obviously have to be inventive and there's a market you've got to appeal to, just like with YouTube. Now, there are people who like sex work, and I know that might be like blowing people's minds. I've seen people saying under communism, there'd be no sex work left. There are people who like sex work, and specifically like it on OnlyFans, where they control their own pages and stuff. Now, I'm a sex positive person. I support sex workers in general, and especially online content creators who are sex workers. I think if they want to do that stuff and really make their own business from this stuff, I totally support that. I'm not a prude in any way. But obviously, I'm not an idiot. The thing I recognize the most is that the sex industry globally is one of gross exploitation, is one where people are often forced into it, coerced into it, has lots of slavery involved as well. I totally understand that. And it's obviously a massive enterprise for organized crime. So I am against obviously that type of sex work. And in my mind, the main way to fight that stuff, although it could probably never be eradicated fully, is legalize this stuff. So you don't have loads of pimps and loads of organised crime having the monopoly on these things in certain countries. So you might not like sex work. I don't care. I don't like a million jobs. I don't care if you don't like sex work. It's work like anything else. The best way to help sex workers in general, not just women, is legalise it broadly in society and obviously protect people who do this as their own businesses online. And I thought it was important to say that because now I'm going to read you about the NCOSE and how I'm obviously like totally at odds with this stuff. So XBiz did a really good report and they say,
For the last 20 years, the moral religious crusaders have been engaged in a costly and quite effective process of rebranding. Morality and Media, the most powerful and influential religious anti-porn lobby, renamed itself the National Centre on Sexual Exploitation and scrubbed most mentions of their religious background to deceive on a deadline journalist unfamiliar with their agenda. Their new name seems to have been chosen to borrow legitimacy from the unrelated but sound alike National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, a respected secular organisation with no anti-porn agenda. The ploy has worked. While mentions of Morality and Media often highlighted their religious background and their connection to the moral majority movement of the 1970s and 80s, the same organisation under the NCOSE disguise is now routinely quoted by mainstream journalists without disclosing their origins, agenda, or extremist views about what constitutes hardcore porn. So in 1968, as the American right developed the notion of a silent moral majority that supposedly opposed and was going to undo many of the social changes brought forth by the 60s, Operation Yorkville changed its name to Morality and Media and sought a national platform. Now led by Father Morton Hill, the same Jesuit who had helped engineer the group's inaugural Fanny Hill stunt, the group protested the 1970 conclusions of the Johnson-Nixon's President's Commission on Obscenity, which called for the repeal of obscenity laws. From then on, Morality and Media grew into the most influential anti-porn crusading group, leading the charge with repeated interventions and scandals seeking sensational headlines and editorials that were then repackaged into lobbying materials for politicians and judges. Morality and Media's highest point of influence was their 1983 meeting with Ronald Reagan that fed into the Mies Commission. Eventually, this all fizzled out. The Commission's slanted conclusions against porn were only taken seriously by biased groups like Morality and Media, which had originated them. Its namesake, Reagan's Attorney General Edwin Mies, resigned in disgrace in 1988, embroiled in a corruption scandal. Last year, Donald Trump presented the Medal of Freedom to Mies, calling this most notorious anti-porn crusader a titan of American law. NCOSE's mission has not changed in their almost 6 decades of existence to have the government classify all sexual expression as pornographic and to establish that the intent behind it is always prurient, obscure word that means appealing to unhealthy sexual interests, and which was key to a landmark 1973 ruling by the Supreme Court. On their website, their Morality and Media era is described as having been the beacon of hope and light for those concerned about the insidious trend to the normalization of sexual exploitation in American culture. This ended in 2015 when they rebranded themselves, claiming the new name better describes our scope and mission to expose the seamless connection between all forms of sexual exploitation. But that vague reason is not the full story. As XBiz reported earlier this year, journalists crediting quotes by Morality and Media without any qualifiers before 2015 worked for Christian publications, and sometimes it entered the New York Times. Morality and Media's rebrand, which also led them to change their domain name to End Sexual Exploitation, was immediately successful. NCOSE reps began to be cited as experts and authorities in a multitude of disparate sex-related articles. They also encourage the public to lobby corporations that they feel are not doing enough to combat pornography, and they release a list every year called the Dirty Dozen, identifying 12 businesses for their rank and file targets. One would think the new war on porn would find its most effective media mouthpieces in the right-wing media, but that's not the case. In fact, the rebranded NCOSE and Exodus Cry make more frequent use of liberal platforms like the New York Times and The Guardian. An XBiz report detailed in March 2020, The Guardian had been engaged in the little-noticed practice of publishing distinctly anti-sex work content that is not generated by their editorial team, but is funded by a shadowy American non-profit with a social change agenda. The Guardian sponsored content regularly platforms people who conflate sex work with human trafficking and claim porn is a form of abuse. The paper, based in London, describes itself as the world's leading liberal voice, and it presents these articles like the rest of the Guardian's content with the same font and artwork. So basically, it's clear that part of the reason that the OnlyFans controversy came about is that there are various Christian far-right groups that are lobbying businesses, pressuring businesses to stop being a part of just sex work in general, whether that's having a relationship with OnlyFans or Patreon or anything like that. And it comes from a place of far-right Christianity. And that's why I want to appeal to like left-wing people to really not use rhetoric that helps these groups and realize you are not helping sex workers or left-wing sex workers as well by repeating this sort of terminology they put out, and realize that the war on sex work is being driven by a more puritanical strain of religion. And it's very, very similar to the war on porn that goes back to the 60s, 70s, and its height in the 80s under Ronald Reagan. So I totally feel, really bad for all the sex workers who use OnlyFans and have been screwed. Obviously, it feels like because of the history of this stuff, part of the reason, at least, maybe the main reason, is because they want to use OnlyFans as a brand to really get more investment, to get more people using the sites. And discarding sex workers seems like it's probably worth the cost to these people, generally. But then I think with OnlyFans specifically, because it's so synonymous with sex work, you do have to take into consideration these lobby groups, especially the one I mentioned, because this one is celebrating this stuff. It says it lobbied MasterCard. It said it did all this stuff. But because of its rebranding, it's been effective in normalizing itself and making it seem like this secular humanist group that cares about trafficking, when that is just a front because they want to ban all forms of sexual expression, which they see pornography as the primary form of that stuff. Now, that's not to say there aren't so many problems with the porn industry, the sex industry. I've made videos criticizing things like Pornhub and the company that has a seeming monopoly on these porn sites. I've criticized a lot of this stuff in general, and of course the general porn industry and sex work industry is rife with a lot of abuse, and of course trafficking goes into that stuff. But when we're talking about Patreon, OnlyFans, Snapchat, these social media platforms that independent sex workers often use to make their income, you should support their fight to maintain their presence on these platforms and really not buy into arguments that like, oh, under communism there'd be no sex work, so leftists shouldn't be pro-sex work. I've seen some ridiculous stuff. So sex work is real work. Support sex work as a legitimate form of work and really realize that there is a big manipulation going on by shadowy American groups primarily, who actually have a far-right Christian agenda, and they don't really seem to care about trafficking. That is just the front to push their anti-porn agenda. But generally just really a bad situation all around. I hope there is a push for sex workers to develop their own platform. I know there's a couple out there which have been created by sex workers. Let's hope they catch on a bit more, and let's hope things like OnlyFans really go down the toilet if they are going to abandon the people who make them so much money. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. Check out our communities on my subreddit and Discord. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching.